All right, while he's setting everything up, I just want to welcome everybody today to MoMA. My name's Kevin. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about a little slice of paradise known as Ho Hum Beach. That's a little place, if you're not familiar, it's out in Suffolk County on the south shore of Long Island overlooking the Great South Bay, which in Belport Bay, just adjacent to the Great South Bay. It's about 4.5 miles across the bay, and once you get to Fire Island itself, you sit there and you're like, wow, this place is awesome. There's nobody around. And, you know, we like our solitude once in a while, and if you ever want that, that's the place to go. But you're not really alone. Once you get off of the ferry, you enter several different biomes. You walk from the bay onto what would be considered the dock, but right next to the dock we have the wetlands. Now, the wetlands itself is affected by the tide. All of Fire Island itself is affected by salt, wind, and the tide. Well, the coolest thing about this bay is that it's actually a giant estuary. And now, because of thankfully to Hurricane Sandy, we now have Old Inlet, which has now become New Inlet, and it's flushing out the bay for us. And with this new fresh water, we're starting to see a revitalization of eelgrass, sponges, okay, and a bunch of filter feeders that keep the water clean, which makes it much more appetizing for all the other little things that eat the little things and the larger things that eat the small things and so on and so forth. Now, with the eelgrass is very important. Got it right over here. That becomes the little nest for all the little things that are growing. On top of that, we have our filter feeders such as barnacles, okay, and sponges. After that, then we get to the crustaceans, okay, other crustaceans such as blue claw crabs, which I love, especially with butter and lemon. Anyway, get the chance to go out there and check it out. Now, once we move from the estuary, move to the tidal flats. And in the tidal flats, we have a lot of what we call bay grass. The bay grass is very coarse. It's not something you want to walk on. It can even cut you at times. Well, this grass is also nesting sites for birds, many aquatic birds, and also places for birds to hang out, okay, and start eating fish, such as the great blue herring. Great blue herring loves it there. We have great blue herrings. We have got night herrings, we've got great blue herrings, we also have little white egrets with the nice puffy feathers that they used to use for ornaments and hats back in the 20s. Well, as you move from this little zone, and it's a very definite zone, you know when you're there, okay, you move from the tidal zone to the upland. And this upland is marked by a high tide line. That means the stuff on the opposite side of it, upland, is drier. Okay, depending on what storm's going to come our way. Now, when you're standing there in the upland, now all of a sudden you're looking around. You're looking at bushes and little bushes, and they come into like sometimes like cedar trees or maybe some pitch pines. Now, this area is very much like a desert. So if you go to Ho Hum Beach, come prepared. Bring water, bring all your essentials, because it's a 1/4 mile walk from the bay side to the ocean side. Now, we've only moved 10 feet. From the tidal area to the upland. Now we have a whole nother, almost a 1/4 mile to get to the dune line. Now when you're walking along the boardwalk and you look down, you see the beautiful flowers in the springtime, yellow flowers. You'll see the white flowers from the beach plums that are starting to grow. Yes, there are plums on Fire Island. And you'll also notice this other little 3-leafed green thing called poison ivy. Now, poison ivy, for those of you who don't know, in the fall, it turns red. And the reason why Fire Island got its name was because the first Dutch settlers that faced, and they looked at that island in the fall, they saw it blazing red, hence the name Fire Island. So, if you ever see 3 shiny leaves, never touch them. Don't breathe on them, don't look at them, don't step on them, because the oil will hang around for about 1.5 years, and you won't know it, and then you'll start itching, and it's a nasty thing. So we have the Fire Island, we have our poison ivy, we have our beach plum trees, we have a whole bunch of conifers, and this is a great habitat for deer, fox, possum, muskrats towards the high tide line. We have a whole bunch of other larger animals that are feeding on the smaller animals. Now, in this area, we also have, when you get right off the ferry and you start moving into the upland, we have a lot of barn swallows and tree swallows. And they're beautiful birds, and they're very friendly. They'll fly right up to you. And they're more friendly when you know that they're eating 1,000 mosquitoes a day each. 1,000 mosquitoes each a day, because once you get into July, and if you're not familiar with Fire Island, you've never been there before, as soon as you step off the ferry, and if the wind is out of the south into your face, you'll realize when you get off the ferry that you're doing this all over the place, all over, because we have a lot of mosquitoes. And in the middle of a wilderness, National Fire Island seashore, you can't spray. But in the small stretch of strip, they do spray. I don't know why, because the wind moves the mosquitoes. So they move the mosquitoes, another huge part of this cycle. And when the mosquitoes come in, they can be quite cumbersome. So needless to say, come prepared. Sometimes we have to dress from head to toe with only a little eye slit to walk our way across to the ocean side. Now, that's just one little bug. There are also other little bugs that you don't know about, that you usually don't know about until days later, and those are deer ticks. Okay? We're not talking about the deer ticks that are brown, or ticks that you know that are brown, small tiny red ones, like the size of the head of a pin. And those are the ones that wind up carrying Lyme's disease. Those you really have to be careful about, because I've found them out on the middle of the sand in the middle of the beach, not even by grass or in the uplands. Okay, so there are a lot of hazards here. We have poison ivy, we have deer ticks, we have mosquitoes. And as we're walking across the center of the island, we see that we have toads. Now, these toads that are in the center of the wetlands, they also eat the mosquitoes. And the fox try to eat the toads, but they don't taste too good. So we tend to have a number of them, but because of spraying and because of other predators such as black racers, okay, we have these snakes, they eat them. And then that takes away from that part of the cycle. So as you're walking across and you see the pitch pines and then you start to see the tall grasses, every so often you might see a northern harrier, which is known as a marsh hawk. Big, broad wings that fly really low across the grasses. And as they're flying low across the grasses, it'll wind up picking up small birds, your little songbirds. You have finches, we have golden finches, we have a number of different finches, sparrows. All right, and that's all nice, well and good. And then you see every so often, you'll see a mourning dove take off. And then maybe once in a while, you'll see a peregrine falcon fly by. Yes, they love to eat birds too. And then we'll even see ospreys, which are really awesome, especially when they come across on the ocean side, and then they splash down, they come up with the fish, and you're like, yay, awesome job. Well, all of these animals are all well and good. And it's even more impressive once you get to the higher part of the highland, in the middle of Fire Island, and you start looking across the landscape. And the first thing that I remember noticing as a kid was you look at the trees, and they all seem to be leaning in one direction. And they don't get much taller than the top of the highest dune. And I remember asking myself, what could possibly cause that? Now, I mentioned three things earlier that form and shape the environment there, and that one of them was the tide, the other one was water, and salt, and there was the other one that I had mentioned. Does anybody remember what it was? Began with the W.
Water.
Water. Wind. Yeah. Wind shear. The wind controls the height in which things grow on this island. And it's predominantly out of the southwest. If you guys didn't know, Long Island is the windiest part of the whole East Coast. Why we don't have more windmills, I don't know. But it is. An abundant source of renewable energy right there at our fingertips, yet to be tapped. But as you look across, you see these trees, and they're all leaning in the same direction, heading towards the northeast. And they're all the same height. It looks like somebody came by and just gave them all a buzz cut. It's pretty cool. That's how strong and how powerful the wind and the salt water is. Okay? It'll stunt your growth if you choose to stand in one place for 20 years. Now, the other cool thing about this desert environment is when you start looking at the smaller things around. Like I said, you'll see the toads, maybe once in a while you see the deer, but the beach plums, especially the beginning of August, that's the time when the people from the island come out. They go out, we pick our beach plums when they're still yellowish, not when they're purple. Purple's too ripe, because then when you go to make them into jam, the beach plums just don't have enough what we call chitin in it. Right, stuff your fingernails are made out of. Stuff that makes the jelly. All right, so you got to pick one that's yellow. But guess what? The raccoons are already eating them. The deer have been eating them. Okay, the fox have been eating them. And we know that because as you're walking on the boardwalk every so often, you'll see a pile of seeds just left there when they were done eating and digesting and replenishing the soil. So as you're walking along and you get closer and closer to the high dune line, you'll notice that the leeward side, the side the wind can't touch on the dune, is very filled with plants. Bushes, shrubs, poison ivy, beach grass. And in this area, it's really a safe place for a lot of the birds in which they nest. It's the leeward side of the dunes that the fox dig their dens. It's the leeward side of the dunes that the deer wind up bedding down. Now, these dunes have been deteriorating through time with waves and wind and water and intrusive people who like to walk all over them, hide behind them to go take a poop. And in time, these dunes have totally been wiped out. All right. Myself, I grew up in the area my whole life. I've been a lifeguard on the beach for 15 years. And the dunes that were there are no longer there. There's no way they're going to replenish because this is a living, breathing environment. It's constantly ebbing and flowing with the wind and with the tides. And to think that we, us, our species, can come in and stop or change that, it's an interesting situation, and it becomes quite political. Okay, so once we get to the ocean side, then we are filled with all of the beach birds. We have our piping plovers, which are quite interesting. They like to shut down whole beaches. As we get to the the piping plovers, then you have your seagulls, your blackback gulls, your herring gulls, and we have little terns. These guys feed off of everything and anything that they can get their hands on. You leave your lunch unattended, they'll pick it up and take it for a flight. Trust me, I've seen one actually pick up a guy's camera and fly off with it, never to return. Okay, so you got to watch out for the thieves of the beach. All right, and those are your gulls. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, that's a brief introduction to what would be Ho Hum Beach. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.